The day began like any other. Gerald trudged out of his farmhouse at dawn, tugging on his worn boots as the screen door clapped shut behind him. The chickens were already clucking in the coop, a comforting and predictable rhythm of farm life. He grabbed a handful of feed from a tin bucket, scattering it over the packed dirt floor. "Eat up, girls," he said, yawning and stretching in the pale morning light. He liked these moments. Quiet, unhurried. The world felt simpler out here, on the edge of town. It was a life he'd known for decades, ever since he inherited the place from his father. It wasn't until later, as he was repairing a sagging section of fence along the south field, that he saw it. At first, he thought it was a distant airplane, a glint of sunlight off metal against the endless expanse of blue sky. But this thing moved differently, erratically, almost like it was spiraling out of control. It grew larger, closer, until Gerald realized it was coming straight down toward his farm. "Aw, hell," he muttered, dropping his hammer. He ran back toward the house, his heart pounding as he watched the object streak overhead. It wasn't a plane. It wasn't a meteor either. It shimmered in a strange greenish hue, something almost alive about the way it twisted in the air. Then, with a thunderous crash, it slammed into the pumpkin patch behind the barn. Gerald skidded to a halt, breathing hard. Smoke rose from the impact site. A circle of churned-up earth, vines, and shattered pumpkins lay before him. He grabbed his shotgun off the porch and advanced cautiously, the hairs on the back of his neck prickling. For a long moment, there was only the crackle of burning debris and the sharp scent of scorched vegetation. Then he heard it, a faint, plaintive cry, a whimper, like a puppy in distress. "Hello?" he called out, though he didn't expect an answer. The sound came again, soft and tremulous. Gerald edged closer, his boots crunching over broken vines. Peering into the shallow crater, his breath caught in his throat. The creature was small, no larger than a golden retriever, with glossy green scales that reflected the sunlight like polished jade. Its head was narrow and delicate, crowned with 2 stubby horns. Its wings were crumpled, clinging to its sides, and its tail curled tightly around its body. The little thing shivered, emitting another faint cry. It opened its eyes, large, round, and a luminous gold that seemed to shine from within. "What in the world are you?" Gerald whispered. He wasn't sure if he was more terrified or fascinated. He'd never seen anything like it. A dragon? Surely not. But there it was, looking up at him with those pleading, alien eyes. For a moment, all his instincts screamed at him to back away. But the creature's frailty tugged at something deep within him. Against every ounce of common sense, he crouched down and extended a hand. The dragon flinched at first, then sniffed the air. It moved closer hesitantly and nuzzled his fingers with a wet, scaly nose. "You're hungry," Gerald murmured, recognizing the same restless energy he'd seen in his livestock when their bellies were empty. "Well, I'll be damned." Cradling the creature as carefully as he could, its warmth was startling, like holding a stone heated by the summer sun. He carried it to the barn. He settled it into an empty stall and set down a bucket of water. The dragon sniffed at it, then lapped it up quickly, making faint chirping noises that Gerald guessed were sounds of relief. "All right," he said, scratching his head. "Water's easy enough, but what the heck do you eat?" He decided to try the chicken feed first, sprinkling a handful into a shallow trough. To his surprise, the dragon gobbled it down eagerly. The moment it finished, its golden eyes seemed brighter, its shivers subsiding. Gerald leaned against the stall door, watching it with equal parts curiosity and unease. "You're one strange critter," he muttered. It blinked at him, and for a moment he almost thought it understood. Then it curled up in the corner, closed its eyes, and drifted into what appeared to be a peaceful sleep. Gerald stood there for a long time, staring at the slumbering creature. The normalcy of the day had shattered with its arrival, and yet he couldn't bring himself to regret it. Whatever it was, wherever it came from, it had chosen his farm as its landing place. And something told him his quiet, predictable life would never be the same. Over the following days, Gerald's strange new guest settled into an unexpected routine. The creature, he'd taken to calling it Sparks because of the faint, flickering light that glowed from its belly after meals, had a voracious appetite. that was as puzzling as it was insatiable. At first, Gerald stuck to chicken feed, which Sparks eagerly devoured by the bucketful. But as the days turned into weeks, he realized he couldn't keep up with its growing hunger using just farm feed. Sparks was changing, fast. By the end of the first week, Sparks had grown from the size of a dog to that of a small calf. Its once soft scales hardened, taking on a metallic sheen that caught the sunlight in dazzling patterns of green and gold. Its wings, initially thin and limp, strengthened until they began to flutter awkwardly when it stretched. The barn stall, that had seemed spacious at first, now barely contained it, and the food it never seemed to stop eating. "What am I going to do with you?" Gerald muttered one afternoon as he hauled a fresh bale of hay toward the barn. He'd discovered that Sparks didn't just eat animal feed. The dragonling happily chomped through stacks of vegetables, barrels of oats, and even bushels of apples and pears. It didn't stop there. Sparks had developed a particular fondness for sweet corn, so much so that Gerald had to fence off the field after catching it in the rows, happily munching through a section of his prized crop. Sparks, of course, had no idea it was causing any trouble. It would always greet Gerald with an enthusiastic chirp, bounding over on its sturdy legs, its tail swishing like a dog's. It seemed genuinely pleased whenever Gerald brought food, its glowing belly brightening as it ate. Once it was full, Sparks would lounge contentedly under the oak tree by the barn, watching the clouds drift by. By the second week, Sparks was the size of a bull. Gerald was running out of ideas and patience. One afternoon, as he carried a crate of eggs and a bucket of milk to the barn, Sparks hopped out to meet him. Gerald stopped short. Sparks' golden eyes had taken on a sharper, more intense look. Its wings were stronger now, unfurling briefly before snapping shut. When it saw the milk, Sparks let out a loud trill and bumped Gerald's chest with its snout, nearly knocking him over. "Easy, easy," Gerald grumbled, shoving the dragon's face away. "You're like a kid in a candy store, no manners at all." He set the milk down, watching as Sparks slurped it up with loud, contented gulps. It then turned its attention to the eggs, devouring them whole, shells and all. Once finished, it rumbled low in its throat, a sound that Gerald realized was Sparks' version of a purr. "You're just one big overgrown cat," he muttered, "a flying, fire-breathing cat." That thought gave him pause. Sparks hadn't shown any signs of breathing fire yet, but it wouldn't surprise him if that was coming. After all, Sparks wasn't exactly normal. Every day, its size, strength, and appetite pushed the boundaries of what Gerald thought was possible, and he had no idea when or if this growth would stop. The first sign of fire came on a crisp morning in early autumn. Gerald was fixing a broken fence post when he heard Sparks let out an enormous yawn from under the oak tree. It was the same sound it always made after waking up, except this time, there was a faint whooshing noise and a sudden burst of heat. Gerald spun around just in time to see a flicker of golden sparks shoot out from Sparks's mouth, igniting a patch of dry grass nearby. "Whoa," he shouted, dropping his tools and sprinting toward the flames. He stomped out the fire with his boots, then turned on Sparks, who was sitting there looking very pleased with itself. "You can't go around lighting the place up, you hear me? This is a farm, not a barbecue." Sparks tilted its head as if confused. Then it rumbled again, a soft, low sound that Gerald swore was laughter. "Oh, you think that's funny, do you?" he grumbled, crossing his arms. "You're going to get me into more trouble than I can handle. I can see it now." He went back to the barn to grab a bucket of water just in case the spark started another blaze. But as he returned, he caught Sparks eyeing him with what looked like guilt. It lowered its head, giving a low, apologetic hum, and nuzzled his arm. Yeah, Gerald muttered, waving it off. "Just try to keep the fireworks to a minimum, all right?" He had no idea how he was going to keep up with this creature, let alone figure out what it really was. But Sparks had already become part of his daily life, its quirks, its ever-growing appetite, and now, apparently, its fire-starting abilities. For better or worse, Gerald was in for the long haul. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, he sat on his porch with a cold glass of tea, watching Sparks chase crows in the field. The dragon's scales glinted in the fading light, and Gerald found himself smiling in spite of everything. "Well, Sparks, he said aloud. I don't know where you came from, but you're one heck of a farmhand. By the time autumn had settled into winter, Sparks had become a towering presence on the farm. Its green-gold scales shimmered in even the faintest light, and its wings, once clumsy and small, now stretched wide enough to cast shadows over entire fields. Gerald had grown accustomed to the strange new rhythm of his life. Feeding a dragon wasn't exactly on his original retirement plan, but here he was. The two of them had settled into an uneasy harmony, despite the occasional scorch, mark on the barn, or trampled vegetable patch. But Gerald's odd new life was about to take another sharp turn. It started on a clear, cold morning. The air was crisp, the sky a vivid blue. Gerald was hauling firewood to the house, his breath forming little clouds, when Sparks suddenly lifted its head. It was perched atop the barn roof, a favorite resting spot now that it was too large to fit inside. Its wings shifted, catching the morning light, and it let out a low, rumbling growl. Gerald set the firewood down and squinted up at Sparks. "What's got you all riled up?" he asked. But Sparks didn't respond. Instead, it stared off into the distance where the horizon blurred into the pale sky. Gerald followed its gaze and frowned. At first he didn't see anything, but then, just above the far hills, a bright glimmering object appeared. It was too high and too fast to be a plane. It moved with a deliberate, smooth trajectory heading straight for the farm. "What in the world?" Gerald muttered, stepping back toward the house. Sparks let out a sharp, piercing cry, louder and more urgent than Gerald had ever heard before. The dragon crouched low, wings half extended, ready to launch into the sky. But it stayed put. Its gaze locked on the approaching object. As the shining craft drew closer, Gerald could make out its shape, sleek, silver, and clearly not from Earth. It slowed as it neared the farm, hovering over the southern field. The object was enormous, easily larger than any plane or helicopter Gerald had ever seen. Its surface glowed faintly, smooth and seamless, like liquid metal molded into an alien shape. The hum it emitted vibrated in Gerald's chest, a deep, otherworldly sound. And then, as silently as it had appeared, the ship descended onto the edge of his property. Gerald's first instinct was to run, but Sparks remained motionless, watching the craft with a kind of quiet intensity. Gerald hesitated, torn between his urge to flee and his curiosity. He'd lived through strange things before, but nothing like this. Finally, a hatch on the side of the ship slid open, revealing a figure cloaked in flowing silvery robes. The being stepped forward, its face obscured by a translucent mask that shimmered with shifting colors. It moved gracefully, as though gravity had little effect on it. In one long stride, it stepped off the ship and onto Gerald's frosty field. Gerald stood frozen as the alien figure approached. Sparks let out a low, almost mournful trill, then crouched lower, lowering its massive head to the ground. The being stopped a few paces away from Sparks, raising a hand in what appeared to be a gesture of greeting. Sparks remained still, its tail twitching slightly as it made a series of soft, throaty noises. The sounds didn't resemble words exactly, but Gerald felt something unspoken pass between the dragon and the alien, something he couldn't begin to understand. Then the alien turned its attention to Gerald. "We thank you, Earthman," the figure said. Its voice was not quite a voice. It resonated in Gerald's mind rather than his ears. The words were clear and melodious, each syllable carrying a strange, calming weight. "You have cared for one of our kind. In doing so, you have preserved a great hope." Gerald opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. What could he possibly say to that? The alien extended a hand toward Sparks, who responded by nudging its massive snout against the outstretched palm. A warm, golden light spread from the dragon's chest, flowing into the alien's hand like a river of fireflies. The alien's entire body glowed briefly, the light fading into its robes. Then it turned back to Gerald. "This creature," it continued, "was the last of its brood. We thought it lost forever. Its survival is a sign, a symbol of renewal. It will grow into a protector, a beacon of unity among the stars. Gerald found his voice at last. "I just fed it," he said, his voice hoarse and shaky. "I didn't know what else to do." The alien inclined its head. "And that was enough. Your kindness has reached beyond your world. For this, we offer you our gratitude." With that, the alien turned and walked back toward the ship. Sparks followed, hesitating only once to look back at Gerald. The dragon made a low rumbling noise, something between a purr and a growl. Gerald reached out, not sure what he was doing, but Sparks was already climbing onto the alien craft. The hatch closed behind them, and the ship lifted off silently, its light growing brighter and brighter until it vanished into the sky. Gerald stood there for a long time, staring up at the empty sky, the cold wind biting at his face. The farm felt eerily quiet now, and Gerald suddenly realized how much he'd grown used to Sparks's presence. He rubbed the back of his neck, unsure what he'd just been part of. "Well," he muttered to himself, "that's something you don't see every day." After Sparks and the alien craft vanished, Gerald was left with an almost unsettling quiet. The farm was still the same in most ways. The chicken coop still needed cleaning, the fences still sagged in places, and the fields still stretched out, endlessly under the changing skies. But without the presence of Sparks, something felt different. For days after the ship's departure, Gerald found himself lingering by the oak tree, staring up at the sky. He didn't expect the dragon to return exactly, but he couldn't help hoping. It wasn't long before the changes began. At first, Gerald thought it was his imagination. The rows of corn near the barn seemed a little taller, a little greener, but he chalked it up to a stretch of good weather. Then he noticed that the tomatoes in the patch beside the house were ripening almost overnight. The pumpkin vines, nearly destroyed when Sparks first arrived, regrew lush and hardy, producing enormous, vividly orange pumpkins long after the usual harvest season. Gerald scratched his head, running his fingers through his thinning hair as he stood in the middle of the fields. He had been farming his whole life, and he knew when something was out of the ordinary. The soil underfoot felt richer, darker, as if it had somehow been rejuvenated. And it wasn't just the crops. The chickens were laying more eggs. And even, the cows seemed to give sweeter, creamier milk. The entire farm seemed to be thriving in a way it never had before. At first, he told himself it was a fluke. Maybe Sparks' manure had acted like some kind of natural fertilizer. Maybe the alien light that ship gave off left nutrients in the soil. Whatever the cause, Gerald didn't want to question it too much. He simply worked the fields as he always did, grateful for the sudden bounty. By spring, word of Gerald's miraculous harvest had spread beyond the county. People started driving out to his farm, neighbors, reporters, agricultural experts. They asked how he'd done it, what new methods or special fertilizers he'd used. Gerald shrugged, offering the same simple answer every time. "It's the land," he'd say. "Got lucky, I guess." But in his heart, he knew luck had little to do with it. Sparks had left something behind, some kind of energy or life force that transformed his humble farm into a place of extraordinary abundance. He didn't understand it, but he didn't need to. All he knew was that the alien dragon's time on his farm had changed everything. As the months passed, Gerald adjusted to this new normal. His farm became a regional sensation, with buyers from all over clamoring for his produce. It wasn't just the size of his crops that impressed people, though the watermelons were now big enough to need forklifts. It was the flavor. Gerald's fruits and vegetables seemed to burst with a sweetness and richness that no one could match. Even more surprising, the improvements in his soil spread to the neighboring fields. Farmers who had once struggled with poor yields now found their crops flourishing. It was as if the land itself had been revitalized. Gerald suspected it had something to do with whatever Sparks had been radiating, though he kept that theory to himself. After all, who would believe a story about a hungry alien baby dragon that just happened to land in a pumpkin patch? Despite the newfound prosperity, Gerald remained the same in many ways. He still wore his old boots and flannel shirts. He still woke up at dawn, fed the chickens, and walked the rows of his cornfields. The only difference was that now, as he strolled past the thriving plants, he sometimes caught himself looking up at the sky. He wondered where Sparks was. Had the dragon found its purpose, as the alien said it would? Was it somewhere out there, among the stars, protecting other worlds, Soaring through alien skies? Gerald liked to think so. Whatever its destiny, he was glad to have played a small part in it. And though Sparks was gone, its presence lingered in every bushel of corn, every crate of tomatoes, every glowing sunrise over his farm. One evening, Gerald sat on his porch, sipping a cold glass of lemonade and watching the fields sway in the breeze. A crow cawed in the distance, the chickens murmured contentedly in their coop, and the air smelled sweet and earthy. He gazed up at the stars, wondering if Sparks was out there looking down at him. "Wherever you are, you big green rascal," he said softly. "I hope you're doing all right." The wind picked up, carrying with it the faintest hint of something warm and electric, something that reminded him of Sparks' golden glow. Gerald smiled to himself. He didn't need any more proof. The dragon's legacy was here, in the thriving land around him, and in the stars that would always be part of his story. And that was enough.